So I am with Serina Chang right now, and she is a PhD student at Stanford. And what are you studying there generally?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD, second year PhD student in computer science. And to give you a little bit more background about myself, I did my undergrad at Columbia University in New York City. And there I majored in computer science and concentrated in sociology. So generally, I would say that my research interests really fall at the intersection of these two fields. I'm very interested in what's called computational social science, that sees this intersection between computer science and social science. So specifically within that area, I would define these research projects that I've been working on lately as stuff that looks at complex systems of human behavior. And I'm really interested in developing computational models and methods that can analyze these complex systems of human behavior and kind of make predictions over them. So to give a couple of examples, a few application areas that I've been working in lately, computational epidemiology is a big one. So there, we've been working with human mobility data. And so that's where the complex system of human behavior comes in. And so the question is, why is mobility so important to predicting COVID and the spread of COVID? And there's a number of reasons. And so if you think about some of the policies that we've put out in response to COVID, a lot of them are mobility based, right? So for example, we have social distancing policies, stay at home policies. And so one really big question is, how much did these social distancing policies help to reduce the spread of COVID, and what would have happened without them? A related question is, what does compliance look like? Another pretty different project, but also tied to my interest in complex systems, is looking at recommender systems. And so in particular, there's been a lot of conversation around this concern that recommender systems, so for example, Netflix or Facebook, or the algorithms you see on Twitter that recommend friends for you or recommend posts for you, there's a concern that they might be driving us into what's called filter bubbles. And so filter bubbles is like this idea that people are mostly only exposed to similar opinions to their own. And so they only see people who have the same ideology as them. And so it's this bubble that you're stuck in. And because of that, you might end up seeing society get more polarized, or at least people have a sense of, they lose perspective on what the entire country is thinking, or even what the entire world is thinking. And so they only see that very unique perspective of their own, and they're surrounded by it all the time. So they're very convinced that it's correct. And so there's a lot of concern around the impact of recommender systems on society, and filter bubbles being one of them. But one of my recent works with my co-advisor, Johan Ugander, we were looking at basically the question of, if you want to say that recommender systems have this impact, the only way to really measure that impact is to measure what would have happened without recommender systems. And so what we did was we built these two models of the world. The first one was looking at what would happen if you have, for example, a user who's, let's take movies as an example. So let's say she gets onto a new platform, she wants to watch a movie for the night. And so in the world with a recommender system, maybe she gets onto this platform and the recommender system tries to estimate what her preferences are and then suggests a movie to her. And so it might ask her to rate a couple of movies, or ask her like, what is a movie that you enjoyed recently, just to estimate her preferences, and then suggest a movie to her. And we compare that scenario against this opposite world in which we don't have a recommender system. And so then it's on the user to try to find a movie that she wants to watch. The platform still has a bunch of movies, but now instead of being recommended one, she takes the time to actually watch trailers, for example, as a way to get an estimate of what the actual movie's content is going to be. And so you've got these interesting dual worlds where in one of them, the recommender system is estimating user preferences and matching her with an item. Whereas in the other world, you have the user estimating movies and trying to find the best one for herself. And so basically we create these two models, and I don't want to get into it too detailed in this first high level answer, but we measure the outcomes that come out of these two different models. And in particular, various statistics like what is the user's expected satisfaction with the movie that she ends up with. So that's one statistic. Another really interesting one is, does this model of item matching, does it bring users closer together or further apart? So in the movie world, you might think of users as being situated by their preferences. So does it make people's preferences closer together or further apart? Or in the context of articles and news, then there's a very clear position, which is your ideology. And so based on the way that you're finding articles, or based on the way that the recommender system is recommending articles to you, as a population, is it bringing users closer together or further apart? And so we find that for all of these statistics that we measure, the two models, so the model where the user is looking for items versus where the recommender system is recommending items, the two models diverge for all of these statistics.
Wow.
And so that's really quite interesting because it suggests that recommender systems might be fundamentally changing the way that we interact with and search for items. And so there's a lot of follow-up work that needs to be done because this was all theoretical. But I think that that's something that really excites me, which is thinking about user behavior, thinking about it within a complex system, and then tying that into these macro level phenomena of societal level of like polarization, filter bubbles, or in the COVID case of epidemiological consequences.
Wow, that's such a really cool way to mix your two interests of sociology, which seems it's not as technical.
For
with
sure.
Computer science. In our group, we were talking about the infodemic that's happening, which I thought
that's a good way of putting it.
It was really interesting because we have an epidemic of information, right? We are overwhelmed with all of this. So
exactly.
That's really cool to think about the different ways that people might make those choices.
And like the little choices people are making and modeling them, and then seeing how the little choices that individuals make then compound upon each other and then balloon into this overall macro level effect. I think that's something I'm really interested in.
So how did you get into this? Was there a person who influenced you, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's just this really unique time in which we suddenly have all of this data on social media and all of this, what's called the big data era. And so it's giving us this unique opportunity to computationally study a lot of social problems at the large scale. And I think there's a need to study a lot of these social problems. So for example, the ones that I mentioned, when you're thinking about complex systems of human behavior, that can involve, for example, filter bubbles. It can involve polarization. It can involve things related to the current pandemic. So social distancing, compliance with mask wearing. It could involve our democracy. So thinking about political forecasting or the spread of fake news, the infodemic, like you're describing. And so there's so many ways that the local ways in which humans are interacting with each other result in these huge societal things that all of us have a lot of stake in. And so I think there are a lot of urgent questions that we do want to answer at a large scale. And then social media, big data, cell phone mobility data, they all give us this opportunity to analyze these things at the large scale. And then computational methods are also advancing as well. And I hope that I can be a part of advancing these methods to develop ways to analyze this data. And so I think there's a huge way in which bringing together computational methods and societal problems is a very rich research area. And also like, this is the time for it. And then I would also argue that it's not just that computational methods can help to solve social problems, but also that it's very much a two-way street. And so there's so much that we can learn from social science as computer scientists. So to give one example, the sorts of engineering tools that we're producing these days as computer scientists, for example, people who work at Twitter or Facebook or Google or Amazon or any of these really big tech companies, they're creating things that are, like I was mentioning earlier, fundamentally changing the way that society is forming and the way that people are forming their own beliefs and connecting with each other. And so when we're creating tools that touch society in this way, we also need to have social scientists, people who really understand humans, who are on the development side for a number of reasons. So one of them is definitely just equity and fairness. We want to make sure that the tools that we're creating are as good for everyone, especially vulnerable communities. And another reason is it can just make our tools more effective, and like, for example, if you want to have Facebook and you want to have people connect with each other in groups and feel as connected as possible, there's a lot of social science behind that. How do you recommend friends, or what kinds of groups might make somebody feel like they're connected in a way that they weren't before? And so I think it's a really rich and great area to think about ways that computer scientists can help social scientists and ways that social scientists can help computer scientists. So that's what got me into this area, just thinking about all these problems that are super relevant today and looking for the way that computer science can help with that. And in terms of who, I don't think there's necessarily like a single person who influenced me to study this field particularly, but there are definitely people who have influenced me to be in research overall and people who have supported me. So for example, my sister and both my parents, they've been incredible support. And my undergrad advisor at Columbia, Kathy McEwen, I first started research with her in a natural language processing lab. And we did a number of computational social science works. And I'm so glad that she was willing to do those with me. And then now that I'm at Stanford, I have two advisors. So one of them is Yuri Leskovic, who is in the computer science department. And he's the one that I've been doing this COVID project with. And the other one is Johan Ugander, who is in the management science and engineering department at Stanford. And he's the one that I've been doing the recommender system project with. And they've both been really great. And I also got to work a little bit with Dan Jurafsky, who's also at Stanford. And he is just an idol in the sort of natural language processing and social science space. And he's been in it for a while. And seeing one of his talks during my undergrad was what inspired me to apply to Stanford, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you got to work with him. That's
that was
cool.
That was amazing. Yeah. And then finally, just two people that I've been working with on the COVID project. They're older PhDs. One of them actually just graduated, Emma Pearson, and also Peng Wei Ko, who's an older PhD. And they're both really supportive and have encouraged me to work in this area. So yeah, I'm glad that I got to mention all these people.
Yes, me too. I always say we stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So what is your dream job then? Do you want to teach, or is there, if you could think of any kind of crazy dream job, what would it be with your work?
I think there are a number. I mean, I'm only in the second year of my PhD, so I've got several more years before I really have to figure that out. At the moment, I would say professor at a research university would probably be my top choice. I really do love teaching a lot. I got to teach for the Girls Who Code program the summer before I started at Stanford, and that was really fun. So Girls Who Code is basically geared towards high school girls, especially from underrepresented communities, and trying to teach them how to code in high school and inspire this sort of love for coding before they go to college. And I got matched with a really amazing classroom, and I had a really good time teaching them. So teaching for sure. And then also at a research university, I get to continue pushing forward on computational social science and working with experts in the field. And so I think that's where I'd love to end up. But I don't know. I don't want to rule anything out yet. I could also see myself as maybe a research scientist in industry. There are some really amazing opportunities. And I know a lot of PhDs out of computer science do end up in industry, either as software engineers or as researchers or something else entirely. And then maybe, I don't know, I think I've found recently, at least, that my work has increasingly been involved with policy making and government kind of concerns. And so maybe I'll end up in government. I don't know. That would definitely intrigue me, though. I think being close to where the laws are actually made and the policy is actually made and being able to advise with that, no matter where I end up, I hope my research will be able to have like a real grounded impact on the world. So maybe in government is the best place to do that.
Yes. Wow. You have so much. I think that you're right. There are so many opportunities. There's so many different ways that you could go with the things that you're interested in.
Exactly. So I don't want to rule anything out yet.
No, definitely not.
We had to pause Serina's interview there. Their work is embargoed right now as they wait for the release from Nature. So stay tuned for that after November 10th.